back to the channel, guys. I'm Mitch from BD Audio, where we like to dyno amps down under. On tonight's episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. And because you've clicked that title, you already know what's going to happen. On tonight's episode, we're going to be looking at LTOs. In particular, this is a skib. This is a 10 amp hour, prismatic, square LTO lithium cell. Now, the main reason you would use these in a car audio situation is purely for power. So when you hear LTO or lithium, you might be thinking of the common Yinglong. This here is a 35 amp hour. They also come in 40s and 45s, all in the same size. This here is your most common sort of everyday scenario cell. Again, cylindrical style, but that's essentially what people would call an LTO. Another example is this one here. This here is a planano, or also known as a nano. This is again a cylinder style LTO. Now you may be thinking, well, no, aren't they capacitors? Well, it means you've already clicked on this channel, but we're going to explain it. This is a capacitor. So this is a Maxwell ultra capacitor. This is not the same as those. The difference with these are maximum power, minimum capacity. These will charge and discharge as quickly as possible. You dead short them, they'll turn into hand grenades. Can be very dangerous, but can also be very beneficial for your sound system. Going down the line back again, this here is a Yinglong. This one here, these are rated 5C standard or 10C pulse, or maybe even 7C pulse. So essentially, they have 35 amp hour and they can deliver 5 to 10C worth of power. Then you have the Planano. These are slightly better in a way. They are only 24 amp hour, so slightly less capacity as the Yinglong, but these have 10C standard power and 20C burst power. So these, again, are getting more towards the ultra capacitor style. These can produce out and take in a lot more power, or twice as much as the Yinglong, which means if you've got the power to give it, it can produce that power. Same as the capacitor. You deliver that power in, you deliver that power out. Now these are slightly different again. These here are only 10 amp hour, but these have a burst capacity, and again, I don't know the number off the top of my head. I think it might be 20 or 30 standard. I think it might even be 35 standard, but they have a 75C rating, which means that these are almost as good as the ultra capacitor, but these have a little bit of storage. So in SPL or burp categories where you need a lot of power quite quickly and still need a little bit of reserve, that's what these are made for. Now at the end of this video, once we've had this full bank set up, ready to go, we will go through the basic specs of how much power these cells can make. But firstly, I want to give a big shout out to my good friend Brenton. He does a lot of CNCing here in Australia, and he has sent me over this little box that has the parts that we need to create this bank. Let me show you. So this first bar, this was a scenario that I was going to run. And essentially I was going to have two sort of separate banks at each side. So I was going to have 3 banks down one side, 3 banks down the other, which would then create a standard square-ish style. However, we have also thrown in a couple of extra bars which allow me to run in a longer but skinnier style, which this is the way that we're going to build it today. But I have the option with this bar here to potentially cut that bar, to cut that bank in half and make it do a U-turn at the end. So in here, you also then have your normal bars. So he has done quite a nice job. And again, I'll throw up the details of his page. If you do want to hit him up, I'll throw up a photo of his Facebook page and his Facebook group page where you might be able to see. He doesn't really use that all often, so you're better off contacting him directly over Facebook. But These here are the end plates. So this is where the end cells for, say, your positive, and we've got 5 bolt down terminals which allow us to run our power cables. So we've got 2 of them. We also do have the center bars that will join each cell bank, so to speak. So we've got a bunch of them. We've got the hardware, so your M4 nuts and washers. Also, bear in mind, I have to mention, when you're building any bank at all with lithium, don't use spring washers. Because what will happen is, specifically these cells, these ones only have a very, very small thread. And I believe that these are only 6 Newton meters when you tighten them, which is almost nothing. That's basically finger tight plus a little turn, and that's it. With the bigger cells, for example, the Yinglong, these here, these are 7 Newton meters. Again, not much. You don't need to tighten them down much. And the main reason you're not actually getting power through the nut and through the stud. The main purpose of the bolt is to hold that plate down onto, hold the bar down directly onto the plate. And that bolt is purely there to hold the pressure down. So when you're building these, whether it's this, skibs, plananos, whatever, do not put anything in between this plate and the bar. Because some people put a washer and they think, oh yeah, this is good, that's how it should be. No, sometimes then people don't know, and they'll actually put a stainless steel washer, which is non-conductive, or it is, but very, very minimal. Then they go and put the bar on top. So essentially all they're going to get is through the threads of the bolt. That's not what it's intended for. You are having to clamp that bar directly onto the cell. If you don't, either A, you will snap the stud, B, you will strip the stud, and you're then going to be in a world of pain. So that's exactly why you don't use a crush washer, because that crush washer takes a certain amount of Newton meters to crush down. That amount is actually more than what the cell needs. So you're trying to tighten it down, going, yeah, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. By the time the crush washer is done, it's going to go from 6 Newton meters to 15, or potentially even a snapped bolt. So when you're doing it, just use a washer and a nut. Furthermore, we've got the accessories. So you've got your little bolts, you've got some ring terminals, some washers. And when he does bars for you, he loads them up so you have everything possible to make the bank done and work. So there's some more bars here. And then finally, he has also thrown in a dual alternator bracket. So essentially what you would do is you would take your hole here, bolt that down onto your alternator, and then that allows you to run 2 positive cables straight off your alternator without having to worry about clearance issues. And you can potentially shift this to where you need it. The other good thing with this is if you are running lithium potentially up front of the car or up the back of the car, you can then run one of these off to your front battery, whether it's whatever you choose, and then this other one can go directly to the back of the car, which essentially kind of works like your big 3. And bear in mind, these are cheap. If you're already ordering bars, definitely get him to make you one of these. I think he sells them for like $30 or so. Get one of these. They're almost nothing cost-wise, but they will definitely help you out on your build. So there we have it. That's the accessories. Again, I'll throw the page up again. I'll throw his Facebook group up. Make sure you hit him up, especially if you're in Australia. He's definitely cheap. You're getting a good quality product. He uses good quality aluminium. He doesn't use that cheap aluminium that you find from overseas when you order stuff from China. This is quality Australian-made aluminium. So very, very good. And he makes them out of 6mm. In this case, he did have to recess them because the studs are quite short on these skibs. But definitely hit him up if you need it. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to unload all of these. I'll probably fast forward it if I can work out how. We'll unload all of these. We'll run you through how the concept's going to be and enjoy watching. So there we go, guys. That's all the cells that we're going to be using once we get them all built. I'll show you the two configurations that I'm aiming for. Ideally, we'll come up with one that we will then use in the end. Let me get these out and we'll go from there. And there we go, guys. That's the first configuration. Your end plate positive. And remembering when you're wiring these, you're wiring them in series. Positive to negative, negative to positive, positive to negative. And you will end up with one positive and one negative. We're also going to run you through on how to do your balances. But in this situation, you have your positive and your negative end bars. You will then have a plate that will go, let me just grab one here. You will then have a plate that goes there that will join those negative, then the positive. You would then have another one that would join those negative and those positive. Then at the end, as I said, if you went this scenario, you would have one long one, which would join these negative and that positive. Then again, once you go around the corner, you have again bars like this, and then following like this. Then the last bars that you would have, as I said earlier, would be these ones here, which are your end bars. So they would bolt down, which would then give you your bolt down terminals to run your wires off. So you would have a positive and you would have a negative. But there is another way of doing this as well. Now in my scenario, originally if I was going to run this in a car, you would have more of a square set, allowing you to drop it into a tire well or something like that. I'm going to show you the way I'm going to run it, because these are for my bench dyno set. So we're going up more power on the bench, which will allow us to do bigger, badder, more powerful amps. Let me show you the other way. And here we go. Here's the other way to do it. So rather than doing it in a smaller compact square, we're doing it in a longer version. Now by doing it this way, I'm able to build the full bank and have it at the back of my workbench, and still allow to be able to put things in front of it. If I had it the other way, it would take up almost a full shelf size. So next, I'm going to show you how to connect all of these up and what's involved to assemble them. So before we get started, we have my socket. So I've got my socket, an extension bar, and a 7mm. A 7mm is perfect. That fits exactly in this size, in this recess, and it's perfect size for my nuts. The biggest thing I can advise you when you're doing this, if you've never done it before or you want to get started, the one thing that will scare the living pants off you is if you happen to touch another bar with this. As you may have been taught in school, wrap your tool. Whether it's sex related or not, always wrap your tool. And I'm going to show you that. Doesn't matter whether you're an amateur or you've done this a million times. I would always suggest, just for the short term, get some electrical tape and wrap the tool. The last thing you want to be doing is short-circuiting two bars together. I've built at least 50 to 60 banks, and I still always do this because you will literally shit your pants if you happen to short two different bars together. So now that your tool is wrapped, you're protected. Doesn't matter how you touch things, it's not going to short out. We're next going to run through, just like before, you have a negative. This side of the positive will join to the next bank of negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our first bar and we're going to whack this into place. Again, it might take a little bit of finessing to get all of those cells lined up perfectly, but that is the first one done. Just like the first one, we move on to the second one. The next positives will then also join to the next negatives. Same thing, drop the bar on, easy. Again, positive this side to negative this side. Another bar. Now again, with these bars, Brenton is nice enough to leave a hole at one side, which allows you to put a little tiny screw in for your balance wires. So you're not having to use a ring terminal on the actual cell itself. You can then run all your balance wires on one side, allowing you to tuck it to the one side. Now, again, positive to negative. The other thing I can suggest is when you're building banks, always build them loose. You always want to have all the bars on first before you tighten everything down, because the last thing you want to do is tighten them all, start here, tighten them, and they're not aligned correctly. And one cell could be a fraction off, which means that then that post will not land within that hole. So we're going to hit the fast forward. I'm going to get all these done and we're going to button it up. All the washers are done. Next, the nuts. So there we have it. There are all the nuts done. That may have only taken a few seconds with the montage, but that took a long time. A lot of tiny little nuts with my big fat fingers takes a long time to wind them up. So now we're going to use the end of the socket. We're going to sort of lightly finger tighten them up. We'll then squash the bank against the wall to make sure that there's all square flat edges and that they're compressed against each other as much as possible. And then we'll start tightening them down. Here we go. So I'm just getting, at the back here, there's actually a hole, so I don't want the cells to drop down. So I've just got a level sitting against the wall to make it square. And I'm using another level to essentially squash them all together. So we'll continue the tightening. So now we'll go back to the socket and we're just going to nip them up. I did swap out my socket just because the one I was using is just slightly thicker sidewall, and because there's so little tolerance in these, I just wanted to make sure that I'm getting them perfect, because some of them weren't quite just getting there. And that, I suppose, is just because the cells themselves, their pins are not exactly perfect. So now that that's all done, you can see that the bank here is complete. Now this is where you would then run your torque wrench over and just check to make sure that they are at that desired torque rating. Make sure you check with the supplier first what they are. Some are 6, some are 7, some can be 5. Check before you do it. The last thing you want to be doing is snapping a stud. Now this is probably a great time to mention, be very careful. Every single one of these bars are conductive with each other. So for example, I don't actually have any examples right this minute, but let's say stupidly you accidentally drop this straight on, that will short each bar. Again, this is why we always use this, because if you're tightening and you happen to accidentally drop it on that bar, it's not going to short those two bars together. That's why you always wrap your tool. Again, you could be working on your subs and your bars are down, your battery's down here and your subs are up here, or you're unscrewing a speaker. It doesn't take much to accidentally drop your screwdriver and it shorts. So when you build these, make sure that you cover them with a towel, you put them in a box with wood. I don't care how you cover these, but do not leave these exposed. There are cases where people have done some silly things, shorted them, which has caused an issue. LTOs themselves do not catch fire. They don't explode, they don't do anything. They will simply vent air through this, which will release the pressure. However, the sparks and the heat and the energy that is caused from a dead short can potentially ignite something close by. If a bunch of sparks go off, you could then ignite the carpet that it is next to, which could potentially result in fatal damage. The next thing now we're going to show is how to wire up the balancer. First thing to explain, what is a balancer? This is a balancer. This is a 5 amp balancer. Now what this will do is it has a minimum and a maximum shutoff. What this is essentially going to do is connect to each of these bars and balance from this bar to that bar with the cells that are in line. And it will always keep them at identical. So between each bar, it will make sure that it is at its exact same. So you're not going to have one that is 2.3, 2.3, 2.5, 2.4, 2.3, 2.6. That is a very, very unbalanced bank. What the balancer is essentially you should have 2.3 across all of them with a very, very minor 0.01 difference between them. I'll throw up a photo here of my digital version just to show you exactly what that might look like. Now what that is, it is the same. This is the same as this. However, you can go a little fancy. These are your basic models. You can then get them just like this, where they've just got like a nice 3D printed red or black case. This one here is a little bit nicer. Again, it's the exact same balancer inside, just in a case, and it has a button. You can pick these up from AliExpress, fairly cheap. And again, it's just safe measures, the way you can just turn the screen on and read the cells. And I'll show you these once we're done. But the biggest thing I also have to mention, when you order these, again, you just order them from AliExpress, online, wherever. On here, you'll see there is 3 solder tabs. LTO, then a middle tab, then one on the right. This currently is LFP, which is LiFePO 4. This is not what we are doing. What you are going to want to do is desolder this and shift the solder joint from pin 1 and pin 2 and detach pin 3. Let me show you what that looks like. So you can now see I have shifted the solder from pin 2 and pin 3 to pin 1 and pin 2. This is now ready for your LTO setup. If you were running LiPo4s or sodium, you would leave it as before. Now, to explain what this is a 5 amp 6S. And the reason it's 6 is because you have 6 cells. What that means, you will have 7 pins. And that is to go between, so you would plug this in, and this goes between all the cells. Now, the simplest way to explain it is I'll throw up a photo right now. And this photo here shows the way to wire it correctly. Now, this is in a cylindrical style. So if you have your LTOs, you would do it as per this diagram. But because we have all of our bars on top, it is much simpler. Your first wire is black. So that one would go up here because this is your negative. Your next color is yellow. So the yellow one goes directly to the next bar. Then white to the next bar. Then blue to the next bar. Then green. Then yellow. And red. Make sure that you don't mix the yellows up. They are the exact same color. Unfortunately, they are a little harder to realize what you're doing. Once that's done, you will then connect it. Let me wire it up and I'll show you what I mean. And I'd like to mention again, when you're buying these bars from Brenton or from Top Shelf CNC, he will even include the perfect size ring terminal that you need. Now, when you are doing it to your wire, yes, you can solder. Yes, there's certain ways to crimp. I'm not the perfect person. However, push the wire. You don't need to trim it. They're already solder tipped. Simply push it in, load it up with the red one. Bear in mind my clips ran the wrong way with the color. Using a ratchet one with a open jaw, crush it in, and it's done. That's as simple as it's going to get. That's not going to come off. You can't pull that off. It's crimped correctly, and there's no solder needed. And you saw how quickly that was. All right, the next little tip I'd like to mention, when you're wiring your balancer, do not have your balancer connected, because again, just like the bars, if I have a couple of these wires connected and one of those touch a different one, it's going to run through it and you'll either spark something or short the balancer out. So always wire it up without the balancer connected. Now, as I said before, there's a couple of different models as such as the way that they're made. All the balancers are the same. Whether they're raw like this, they might come with a clear acrylic top, they might come in a little 3D printed box. People sell custom boxes. I used to, not anymore. I'll throw a photo up just for shits and giggles. And then there's this one, which again is the exact same, but it has the ability to switch. So with that said, we're going to plug the first one in just so I can show you what it looks like. So simply click that into place. To know that it's working, there will be a little yellow light, and that means that the balancer is actively balancing. We are going to now remove this one, and we're going to plug in the little bit better one. Again, it's only better because it has a screen. We'll plug this in. I can do it one-handed, and you'll see that the screen will load. Once it comes up, you have your cells. So currently we have 2.42, 2.43, 2.43, 2.44, 2.45, 2.43. So again, they're all 2.4, which is great, but that second number needs to be within one spec. Currently, the lowest we've got is 4.2, and the highest we have is 4.5. So what this balancer is now doing, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. What this balancer is now doing is it's currently actively balancing all of these cells. And it could take a while. At the end of the day, it's 5 amp. It's not very much. And you also have your overall voltage. You can see here, 14.63 volt. And that is the complete balancer working. Now, I can turn the screen off, and that will still be actively balancing. Only until there is a 0.15 discrepancy is where it will switch off. Any less than that, it will not balance. Simply click the button and it's back on. With this, you can simply stick it to the side of the bank, stick it to the box, stick it to the top. Doesn't matter. There's a couple of screw tabs. With the older style, there are screw holes, but just remembering you'd have the circuits on the back, so they do sit proud. So just make sure, use a couple of washers or potentially a nut or something to just space it off what you're screwing it to. Great, so now your bank is built. How much power does it really make? The simple way to calculate this is you have 10 amp hour cells. In this case, I have 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 10 amp times 6. That's a total of 60 amp hour. Then we're going to times that by its C rating. At a maximum burst power, it's 75 C, which equals 4,500 amps. Now, with those amps, to calculate how much RMS it's going to make, you're going to take, even though this is currently sitting at 14.6, and you might charge this up to 15.5, at that full hit, this bank might still drop to a worst case scenario of 12 volt. Now, if we work that backwards and we say 12 volt times 4,500 amps, that equals a whopping 54,000 RMS. Now, that's just a number, but depending on the amplifier that you use and depending on how efficient or inefficient it is, most Class D full bridges are around 80%. So the best way to work this is take your 54,000 RMS and minus 20%, which is your 80% efficiency. You will end up with a total of 43,200 RMS. So this one bank at full pelt dropping to 12 volt can produce 43,000 RMS. Now, if we were to take that voltage and say you don't get as much drop, maybe you might have a slightly bigger bank, but let's just say that this bank might not drop all the way to 12. Say it might drop only to 13.5 at full pelt at 75 C. This then is 13.5 times 4,500 amps which equals 60,750 RMS, minus your 20% for efficiency, equals 48,600. So this bank at 13.5 volt is going to almost make 50,000 RMS. That's insane. And this bank is not very big. Like, you can compare my hand. My hand is basically one of these banks. So it's tiny. For a bank this size, and you're comparing maybe, say this is equivalent to 2 AGMs. 1 AGM, 2 AGMs. Okay, the height is obviously not as big and the depth is not as big. But as a lengthwise, 2 AGMs, there's no way in hell you are going to get almost 50,000 RMS out of that. Now, these aren't overly cheap by the time you get your bank, your bars, your balancer, the assembly, everything, but it is definitely worth the money. Just remember, you need to have power to make power. You can't go and run a 12k amp off 1 or 2 AGMs. It just will not work. But that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we managed to teach you something along in this process. Good luck with your LTO banks. This will apply to skibs, yinglongs, plananos, basically anything in a 6S configuration. A 4S configuration would essentially be the same setup minus these. So you would then have your positive bar here and your negative bar there, and your BMS or your balancer would only have 5 cables instead of 7. And lastly, I would just like to do another big shout out to Brenton. If you haven't already gone and checked his page out, go and shoot him a message. Get some really nice bars made up. He can even get your initials, your logo. If you want to get your brands CNC'd on, he can do them. He can then also do color matched ones. I'll put some photos up here at the moment. And he does a great job. They're fast, they're efficient, they're good quality. He's never had any issues with them, and he's made so many of them for the Australian community. If you're out of Australia, it might be a little bit more costly to have them sent, but still, definitely hit him up. Go and check out what he does. He does a lot of testing as well for me with all different types of cells and lithium and stuff like that. So go and check his page out. Go shout him and say hello. And that's all we've got for you tonight. If you do like what we do on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. That way, when we do these kind of tech videos, learning different ways of doing things, and hopefully we get to teach you something along the process, you'll always be alerted. Thanks for tuning in. This is Mitch from BD Audio, where we like to dyno amps down under. I'm tuning out. See ya!